Thank you, Mr. President, for inviting me to speak, and I'd like to thank, the remainder of the chamber for staying here tonight. I do apologize, though, however, for making you guys listen to the opposition's totally false representation of this very inclusive and lighthearted depiction of woke culture. For in reality, from its first rise to the mainstream with the Black Lives Matter movement, woke culture or wokeism has undergone an exceptional amount of change. What once started as a venerable movement that shed light upon ingrained sources of oppression in modern day has become an inherently divisive and toxic catch-all label for various seeming progressive social problems. The term woke has become weaponized by those across the political spectrum. It is used by those on the left to critique pseudo-activism moored by superficial and performative idealism. It is used by those on the right as a means of mocking and satirizing the politics of those across the aisle. Indeed, to be woke nowadays increasingly means to attach yourself with stigma, one way or another. Now, this degradation of what it means to be woke is, in and of itself, a token to how woke culture has indeed gone too far. In general, one could list a series of such tokens, anecdotes of woke ideology running amok in regressive and deleterious attitudes. Effectively, this approach would demonstrate that wokeness has indeed gone too far. But today I intend to give a more formidable answer that gets to the heart of the problem. How and why woke culture has gone too far, the precise manner in which it poses a threat to our society. To achieve this, my argument will unfold along three dimensions. Firstly, how woke culture in its current form has become a hazard to the healthy functioning of our democracies. Secondly, how it infects human and social relations, fracturing an already fragmented society. And thirdly, how woke culture has come to disqualify and weaken precisely the social causes that it was intending to support. Now, onto my first point, as to how woke culture is a major threat to our democracy. It specifically undermines and corrodes the supporting mechanisms of our modern-day democratic institutions. Democracy indeed functions via open debate and discussion. It was born on the Agora, the forum for discussion rich and diverse. It's through the continuous interaction of dissenting opinions on critical issues that consensus and eventual truth emerges. Challenge and accountability are at the core of quality in thought, especially on contentious public issues. We all live it on a weekly basis. Where would our essays be if all our tutors, told us what to write and told us what to say? The chamber in which we are indeed sitting here right now is built on the rich history of dissent, argument, and controversy. Woke culture in its excessive form operates on a different set of beliefs, however. It advocates for a moral imperative to fight against, albeit very real, social and racial injustices and discrimination in the Western world, but via any and all means. The call for an abuse of power to silence debate and paralyze the spreading of ideas, of all ideas that goes against their own ideology. Their tactics rely on coordinated, coercive attempts to win a debate by ending the debate. The goal is to punish, not educate. We see the manifestation of this censorship across all aspects of life. Under woke culture, language, art, culture, politics, and many more avenues must be cleansed of their inflammatory content. New words, euphemisms, paraphrases appear to replace those now deemed offensive. As in George Orwell's 1984, obviously familiar to many of you here, the idea is to prevent the expression of critical ideas by changing the vocabulary. Most worryingly, this toxic swathe is spreading to our educational institutions, one of the indispensable cradles of truth-seeking and genuine free speech. As Toby Young has mentioned before, Kathleen Stock, a philosophy professor at the University of Sussex, is a case in point. Just last year, she was canceled and later ousted from the university. What was her transgression, you might ask? Simply discussing the notion that biological sex is an inalienable reality. In an interview with The Telegraph just a few weeks ago, the professor has refused to continue in academia, at least in the UK, quoting the ideological capture of its institutions. Now, personally, having grown up in a communist regime, these sentiments are all too familiar to me. Fortunately, I've not observed anything to this effect in our home here in Oxford. But nonetheless, the hazard to free speech is evident. To be clear, I'm taking no moral stance on what the correct claim or truth on Kathleen's topic was. Notwithstanding, it is the barrage on the individual and the refusal of dissenting opinion that is problematic. We must fight to preserve the free flow of ideas, of debate, of an open society, despite it making us uncomfortable. Excessive wokeism attempts to destroy the mechanisms of democracy to achieve its purported objective to preserve it. Now, to my second point, excessive wokeism corrupts our relationships on both a personal and institutional level by universalizing and thus essentializing all conflicts in terms of identity. Now, to sort of break this down a bit, by essentializing, I mean reducing members of minority groups down to the specific characteristics wokeism deems are cumulatively determinant of our identity. These tend to be the immutable characteristics of race, sex, and sexual orientation. This is a problem on two levels. Firstly, on the personal, it undermines the humanistic conception of the rational, autonomous self. And secondly, on the social level, it divides the society into warring tribes, ultimately working against wokeism's own goal of collective emancipation. Now, first, on a personal level, wokeism is indeed problematic. The ideas of humanism emphasizes the value of our shared humanity, founded upon a faith in our ability to live free of the natural determinants of our condition. Concretely, it means rejecting wokeism's essentializing discourse, which chains and limits us to the accidents of nature. Perhaps this is why wokeism is assessed with such skepticism in France. It opposes all of the values upon which a free republic of equals is founded. My claim here is quite simple. It is in itself wrong to reduce people to the things that they do not control, such as their race, class, sexuality, privilege. Awareness of these features is essential, but to see only this is to abandon yourself to blind dogma. Now, second, on a societal level, wokeism problematically universalizes what are, in fact, instantiated interactions between individuals. Now, what I precisely mean by this, albeit jargon of words, is that wokeism sees larger dynamics at play whenever two individuals who belong to different identity groups conflict. The problem with this is twofold. Firstly, it is simply erroneous to see individuals not as autonomous agents, but rather as representatives of collectives they have not chosen. Secondly, this leads to dangerous social antagonism. It is beyond doubt that we live in an age of unparalleled polarization. That is exactly the strength of woke culture. Nothing motivates people more than the defense of their personal and inevitably group interests. Such tribes will mobilize and vote, but they will also tear each other apart. Woke culture weaponizes identity, and history has taught us the consequences of doing so. From Saddam Hussein's Halabja massacre of the Kurds to Srebrenica, the ultimate destination of tribal conflict is not unknown to us. Wokeism has gone too far because its necessary lessons have often turned us against one another rather than united us in a collective vision of the future. Now, on to my final point. Wokeism in its current form hinders both the social causes that it seeks to advance. Now, wokeism, insofar as it fails to unite us through its lessons, it's fundamentally counterproductive. As I've established prior, woke culture's identity-based arguments are a uniquely intoxicating mix. People defend their political positions not because they necessarily believe them to be right, but because their politics becomes their identity. They simply become too attached to a perception of themselves to change. This is true both of liberals and to conservatives. Consequently, our polarization mutates into something uglier, something much more dogmatic. Our minds become closed to the opposing views because they don't challenge our positions. They challenge our very being. This is a consequence of woke culture, and it only fragments the liberal alliances we need to build to affect the change we want to see in society. The isolation of independent-minded voters who are often disgusted by the intolerance, viciousness, and belligerence which often characterizes woke infighting does nothing to further the goals of woke individuals. My final claim here is once again a relatively simple one. Excessive wokeism gets in its own way by fracturing rather than cultivating the collective consciousness of the oppressed. So thus, ladies and gentlemen, this is the state of nature that we have found ourselves in. Woke culture has evolved into something toxic and corrosive, undermining the underpinnings of our democracy, pitting us unnecessarily against one another, and ultimately confounds the progress of social causes that it seeks to resolve. With this, I strongly urge all of you to vote in favor of the proposition tonight. Thank you.